Hi, I'm Micah Halpern. Thank you for joining me today as I do some thinking out loud. Our first segment is called Background Briefing. The first thing I've been thinking about are the United States, the United Nations, and Israel. Why the United States is disciplining Israel so publicly, especially in the United Nations. Round one. Friday, March 22nd, 2024, the United States sets forth a resolution in the United Nations Security Council calling for a ceasefire in their war with Hamas. China and Russia veto the resolution proposed by the United States, and the resolution fails. Round two, Monday, March 25th, the other end of the weekend. The second resolution, not proposed by the United States, but calling for an immediate ceasefire, the first one wasn't immediate, passes in the Security Council by a vote of 14-0 with one abstention, and China and Russia vote in favor of the resolution. The United States is the country that abstained. By abstaining, the United States permitted the resolution to pass. It was, in no uncertain terms, a watershed event diplomatically. Why is the United States of America, the country that often calls itself the big brother of Israel, disciplining Israel so publicly? Linda Thomas Greenfield, the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, explained away the U.S. abstention, saying that the Monday resolution did not condemn Hamas and lacked the important components linking the ceasefire to the release of hostages, elements that were embedded in Friday's U.S. resolution. What she did not explain is why the United States chose to abstain and chose not to veto the resolution, much as Russia and China had done. Had the United States used their veto power, the resolution would have been squelched. The fact that the resolution is non-binding is secondary to the fact that the United States removed their protection of Israel in the United Nations. Of course, if you get your news from the Arabic press or watch and listen to the media as it's presented throughout the Middle East, you would never know that the resolution was non-binding. The Iranian media and the English language Arabic media also chose to portray the non-binding resolution as a binding resolution. And then, twisting the proverbial dagger even more, they referred to the world's outrage against Israel. They breathed an audible sigh of relief because with this resolution, finally they believed the world is seeing the real Israel. Iran and Hamas entirely embraced the resolution, and still the United States did not veto the resolution. The support of Hamas and Iran alone should have been enough to tip the scales of the U.S. decision makers to veto the resolution and not to abstain. In the span of 4 days, from Friday to Monday, the world witnessed a dramatic change in U.S. diplomatic policy. On Friday, the United States was diplomatically speaking gung-ho about condemning Hamas. On Friday, the United States was adamant about linking a ceasefire to the release of Hamas-held hostages in Gaza. But on Monday, the United States, through the grace of their own abstention, waved through a resolution that made no mention, no reference to the hostages, or to the October 7th massacre at all, nor to Hamas. Even if the United States is disappointed, angry, peeved with Israel, why allow this resolution to be on the record? It would have been so easy for the world's greatest, largest democracy to veto this resolution, especially if they disagreed with its tone and its wordage. With this abstention, the United States broke with a long-standing tradition of protecting Israel in the Security Council. While it is true that there were previous presidents who permitted resolutions critical of Israel to pass by not vetoing, never ever was this done at a time that was so critical to Israel. Well, Israel was in the middle of a war. At this moment, Israel is literally fighting for its existence. At this moment, enemies of Israel are gaining strength in the world, and the United States just enabled them and enabled Hamas. On December 23, 2016, during the final weeks of the Obama administration, U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, Samantha Power, abstained in a vote condemning Israeli settlement activity. In November 1981, Ronald Reagan refused to have his ambassador veto a resolution condemning the Israeli bombing of the Iraqi nuclear reactors. And in 2004, the Bush ambassadors abstained in a resolution condemning Israel for destroying Palestinian homes. So none of those abstentions compare to the Biden abstention of March 25th, 2024. The timing of this abstention is clearly political. President Joe Biden and others like Senator Chuck Schumer want Netanyahu out of office. Washington wants to distinguish between their support of Israel and support for Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. That was the essence of Senator Schumer's speech from the Senate floor, calling for new elections in Israel and calling for Netanyahu to step down. A sentiment, by the way, echoed and supported by President Biden. Washington thinks, as do certain people in Israel, which is important to note, that Netanyahu is acting and making decisions based on his desire to resuscitate his political career, that he is catering to his right-wing flank. Correctly, they assessed that Israel will hold Netanyahu accountable for the snafus and tragic failures that led to the unthinkable, unimaginable, gruesome massacre of October 7th. They are correct on that. But what U.S. leadership does not see is that the vast majority of Israel is in favor of finishing the job, in favor of going into Rafah, in favor of destroying Hamas, and now not allowing it to gain power again. What U.S. leadership refuses to understand is that now, after October 7th, the vast majority of Israelis understand what Hamas really stands for. Israelis understand, with their hearts, their souls, and their minds, that recent polling of the Palestinians demonstrated that the majority of Palestinians believe that October 7th was justified, that Hamas did not perpetrate mass murders or rape, is real. They don't believe that. Palestinians believe Hamas. Palestinians believe in Hamas. And while Russia and China were teaching the United States a lesson by vetoing one resolution and then voting for the other resolution, they showed the region and the world that they have input, that they can protect, and they can protect Israel from the United States itself. What a royal snafu on the part of the greatest democracy in the Western world. Coming up next, points of view. First up is a column from the Wall Street Journal published on March 14th, 2024. The column was written by Ophir Falk, who is an advisor to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. The column is entitled, "Israel Will Defeat Hamas in Rafah." Subtitled, "We've incapacitated most of the terror group. Rafah is its last stronghold, and we must win there too." Falk explains that Israel can and will destroy Hamas, despite what some analysts proclaim on the airwaves and in the media around the world. This is how the column begins. Mounting international pressure to end the war won't weaken Israel's resolve to accomplish its mission of destroying Hamas, freeing the hostages, and guaranteeing that Gaza will never pose a threat to Israel again. Detractors dismiss total victory as implausible, but the facts on the ground indicate otherwise. Falk continues, Israel has already dismantled 18 of Hamas's 24 battalions, incapacitated more than 500 Hamas terrorists, about 2/3 of its force, including 2 of the top 4 leaders, and destroying significant terror tunnels. By contrast, it took the United States military forces 9 months to take out 5,000 ISIS fighters in Mosul. As the column continues, Falk actually offers perspective and uses quotes from an expert on urban warfare at West Point. He points out just how well Israel is performing, and by comparison, how much more Israel is doing to protect civilian lives. Falk writes, John Spencer, chairman of Urban Warfare Studies at West Point, described Israel's achievements as unprecedented, especially given the complex combat conditions above and below ground. Mr. Spencer says that Israel is setting the gold standard for avoiding civilian casualties. Israel doesn't need promoting to provide humanitarian aid or to act with caution. According to retired British Colonel Richard Kemp, the average combatant to civilian death ratio in Gaza is 1 to 1.5. About that. This is astonishing since, according to the United Nations, the average combat to civilian ratio in urban warfare has been 1 to 9. Israel seeks to minimize civilian casualties, while Hamas seeks to maximize civilian casualties and use them as a propaganda tool. We cannot let Hamas's strategy pay off. Now Falk gets to the essence of his piece by explaining that Israel must continue and must go into Rafah. The column continues. Hamas has 4 terror brigades in Rafah. The city is Hamas's last stronghold, and its defeat is a prerequisite for victory. Whoever pressures Israel to refrain from entering Rafah is preventing the destruction of Hamas and the freeing of Israel and Gazan civilians from Hamas's stranglehold. General David Petraeus, who led the 2007 American surge in Iraq, said last week that the key now is to not stop until Hamas is fully destroyed. Asking Israel to stop the war now is akin to telling the Allies to stop halfway to Berlin in World War II. If Hamas isn't eradicated, genocidal terrorists will continue to emerge, as Prime Minister Netanyahu told new Israel Defense Force cadets last week. When we defeat the murderers of October 7th, we are preventing the next 9/11. Global leaders should take note. In his conclusion, Falk explains that Israel must continue to root out Hamas. Otherwise, Hamas will rise again, endanger Israel, and endanger the world. This is Falk's conclusion. High-intensity combat will wind down after Rafah. Humanitarian aid will no longer be hijacked by Hamas, and safety for civilians can be realized. Total victory is within reach. Israel will finish the job. Anything less will endanger the rest of the civilized world. This is an excellent piece. Well done, Ophir Falk. Next up is a column by Michael Milstein. It was published in Ynet on March 29th, 2024, and it's entitled Palestinian Public Opinion Post October 7th is Discouraging and Sobering. Subtitle, Opinion, no external party can exert a profound change on the Palestinian outlook, certainly not who they define as their enemies. Such change requires some soul-searching and poignant self-criticism, as was conducted in the post-1945 Germany, but this currently is not taking place. This column is both disturbing and very sobering. It hurts me to read this out loud, to read it period, but this is the information Milstein lays out, which is already sine qua non for Israelis who learned these lessons immediately after October 7th. The opinion polling of the Palestinians, as outlined in the column, just proves the point. This is how Milstein begins. Even after all kinds of reservations and qualifications, it's hard to ignore the startling trends reflected in the Palestinian public opinion poll published last week, illuminating the Palestinians' views on the war in Gaza. While survey results should certainly not be accepted without caution, especially when conducted during wartime and in regions where residents are wary of answering pollsters truthfully, the emerging trends are significant, have been recurring throughout the war, and are similarly reflected on the ground. The quarterly poll was conducted by the Palestinian Center for Policy and Survey Research, the PCPSR, headed by top Palestinian pollster Dr. Khalil Shikaki. The most striking finding for Israelis was also evident in the survey conducted in December, since it reflected traditional Palestinians' bipolar behavior. There was overwhelming support for the October 7th attack, 71%, as well as total denial that Hamas committed war crimes, 91%. Respondents also accused Israel of committing such crimes, 94%, and underscored the narrative that Palestinians were the victims. The numbers are shocking, to state the obvious, truly shocking. And they do not stop there. Milstein continues. The poll further reflects unprecedented support for Hamas, 34% compared to 17% for Fatah. Satisfaction with Hamas leader in Gaza, Yahya Sinwar, at 65%. And the preference for a Hamas-led regime in the aftermath of the war as compared to return to the Palestinian Authority to the Gaza Strip, and rather than family clan rule or administration under Israeli auspices. Moreover, it shows admiration for external parties hostile or harmful to Israel, even if they are unable to help, the Palestinians, or are altogether indifferent to their cause, like Yemen, Hezbollah, Iran, and Russia. Contempt also was shown for those who helped the Palestinians, particularly the United States, which reportedly received just 1% of survey respondents' support. The polls also reveal that there is overwhelming support for Marwan Barghouti to lead. But Barghouti is sitting in Israeli prison, sentenced to 5 life sentences, and it reveals how unpopular Abbas is among those polled. This is how Milstein puts it. Domestic and Palestinians continue to support the election of Marwan Barghouti, Fatah's senior leader, who has been imprisoned in Israel since 2002, as their next president across the board. He defeats every other candidate in all scenarios dramatically, without considering the complexity of his being in prison or the fact that his name is synonymous with messages of terror that are likely to put the Palestinians all on the path of escalation with Israel. In addition, the largest number of poll respondents ever favored the ousting of Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas, with 93% in the West Bank. Now Milstein concludes, writing that there is a massive problem here. In his words, the fact that not a single prominent Palestinian politician or intellectual has taken a stand against the October 7th atrocities is a striking context. The survey findings also correlate with the often used term in the post-October 7th Israeli discourse, disillusionment, a renewed realization that the two communities are at opposite ends of a deep cultural divide, including issues such as ethics, truth, and how others should be treated. The roots of this conflict are also given new meaning. Most Israelis find the frequently heard arguments about occupation or economic hardship as inadequate as explanations for the viciousness exhibited on October 7th, fueled by tremendous inbred ideological animosity rather than intelligent, resolvable motives. Every time I read these polls, I am shocked anew. How can it be? How can there be such a chasm between what we see and what the Palestinians see? Of course, I can explain it, but I will never understand how Palestinians can so willingly and wholeheartedly embrace the Hamas massacre. Coming up, commentary through cartoons, where pictures tell the story. I'm going to show you 6 cartoons, memes, and headlines today. First up is a headline. We haven't done headlines in a few weeks. From the British newspaper, the Daily Telegraph. I did not make this up. In fact, at first I couldn't believe that it was true. So I searched and found the original headline, and indeed it is true. The headline reads, "London is now a no-go zone for Jews." Imagine that. Next is a pun on New York Senator Chuck Schumer. For years, anyone who has heard Chuck Schumer speak in front of a Jewish group has heard him say that his name is a form of the Hebrew word shomer, or in English, a guard, that he himself is the guardian of Israel. In all my studies, all throughout my history, I've never found his name Schumer emanating from Europe as guard. It just doesn't happen. Shomer doesn't exist. It does exist, however, in German. And in German, as you can read, Schumer means good for nothing or vagabond. That's funny. Now a cartoon of a faculty lounge at a university. On the walls are portraits of the university's heroes. Hanging on the walls are portraits of the Ayatollahs of Iran. Now a cartoon depicting the UN Security Council. We see Gaza in the middle of the table with an arm and a voting arm rising up from a pool of blood. This is a biting critique of the UN Security Council. The next cartoon is a very uncomplimentary one to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. We see Biden coming to visit Netanyahu and has a ceasefire in his hand. Bibi, from behind a locked door, shouts, "I don't want to see you. Leave the weapons delivery at the door and go away." More and more of these anti-Netanyahu and anti-Israel cartoons and caricatures are appearing every day in the world media. Finally, a tribute to Senator Joe Lieberman, who died as a result of complications from a fall. He was 82 years old. I first met Joe Lieberman when he was Attorney General of Connecticut, way back in the mid-'80s. Years later, my brother-in-law and Joe were actually roommates in Al Gore Sr.'s apartment at the Watergate. Whenever there was an important vote on Shabbat, the senator would stay over in the apartment. Being Shomer Shabbat, the senator did not have a problem, according to Jewish law, in the Senate. Because in the Senate, they vote by acclamation. They vote by raising their hands, not by electronic vote, which they do in the House. So we would walk to the Capitol from the Watergate. Joe was a very special leader. He was unapologetically embraced his Judaism, his love for Jewish people, and his love for America. He believed in the middle of the road. He was always a gentleman. Joe Lieberman will be missed. They don't make them like him anymore. Yehi Zichro Baruch. In a moment, more of my own perspective and a few predictions. On his return from Washington, D.C., Defense Minister Yoav Gallant conducted a situation assessment at the Northern Command and directed the IDF to expand the campaign in the north. Gallant also said, "We are shifting from repelling to actively pursuing Hezbollah. Wherever they are hiding, we will reach them, including more distant places like Damascus and beyond. We will increase the rate of attacks and expand our operations." That's what I conveyed in Washington to Secretary of Defense Austin, to Special Envoy Amos Hochstein, and to others. That's what I instructed the IDF Northern Command to do. The IDF announced that this year's Independence Day, or Yom Ha'atzmaut, flyover, and flotilla are canceled because of the ongoing war. Plans for the ceremony honoring distinguished soldiers at the President's residence will be determined at a later date. On Israel's Memorial Day for fallen soldiers, however, is a customary flyover, and that will take place. It will occur over Mount Herzl and the Air Force House in Jerusalem. Additionally, the Jerusalem municipality announced that Independence Day events in the city will not include fireworks. The municipality explained that the decision came against the backdrop of security situation and the ongoing war, and taking into account the post-trauma victims, people with anxiety, sensory regulation problems, the elderly, and animals who are afraid of loud noises. The municipality has not yet finalized the nature of the events, and any event that takes place will certainly not include fireworks. Best Picture winner Oppenheimer finally premiered in Japan 8 months after a controversial grassroots marketing push and concerns about how the award-winning movie's nuclear theme would be received in the only country to suffer atomic bombing. The biggest winner at this month's Academy Awards, the film was directed by Christopher Nolan about the US physicist J. Robert Oppenheimer, who led the race to develop the atomic bomb, has grossed nearly $1 billion globally. As a result of the Oppenheimer bomb, nuclear blasts devastated Japan's western city of Hiroshima and the city of Nagasaki to the south. At the close of World War II, more than 200,000 Japanese were killed. In a rather mixed message, U.S. President Joe Biden referred to the war in Gaza at a fundraiser in New York. He said, "There are too many innocent victims, Israelis and Palestinians. We must get more food, medicine, and supplies for the Palestinians." Biden emphasized that, and I'm quoting again, "We cannot forget that the very existence of Israel is at stake. Israelis were massacred. Imagine if this happened in the United States. It is understandable that Israel has such deep anger, but we must stop the war effort that causes the significant death of innocent civilians." We've been thinking out loud about a lot today. Now that you know what I've been thinking, let me know what you're thinking. Email me at micah@jbstv.org. Tweet me at Micah Halpern. Tell me what you think. Before we end, let me leave you with one piquante piece of information. Did you know that Israeli hospitals treated terrorists after the October 7th massacre? Hamas terrorists. You're about to see an interview in which Dr. Shlomi Kaddish, Director General of Soroka Hospital in Beersheba, explains what Israeli medical professionals do, why they do it, and how grateful they are for the emotional support that they get from people like you around the world who love Israel. Kaddish explains how bewildering it is knowing what he does and yet seeing protests against Israel on the streets of cities worldwide. As a personal aside, one of our dear friend's son, Ari, or Moshe Aaron ben Leah Bela, is in Soroka Hospital fighting for his life. From the moment of his devastating injuries in the tunnel in Gaza until he was taken into surgery at Soroka Hospital, only 42 minutes elapsed. The medical staff has been kind, devoted, upbeat, and most importantly, Herculean in their efforts to heal this 22-year-old hero. Remember his name, Moshe Aaron ben Leah Bela. He needs all of our prayers and good wishes.
Soroka Medical Center emergency doctors and nurses treated nearly 700 patients immediately following the terror attack. That's about 4 times their usual number. Patients included women, children, and also Israel's enemy.
We had some Hamas terrorists brought into our hospital. We all are obligated by international oaths and by moral duty to treat and stabilize anyone we see. In both cases, the terrorists were moved on to army facilities for continued medical care.
As wounded men, women, and children poured in, the extent of their injuries shocked hospital workers.
Seeing young women brought in pajamas who were shot down in their beds, in their sleep, with 3 or 4 gunshot wounds to chest, abdomen, limbs. We've never seen the magnitude and quantity of so many patients coming in this way.
Some calling it inhumane.
An 8-year-old child who saw his father shot down next to him and is himself wounded by 2 gunshot wounds. We've never seen these type of injuries.
Twin babies arrived dehydrated and malnourished, but alive, after rescuers found them hidden in a secret closet hours after terrorists had murdered their parents.
One cannot help but imagine what the parents had gone through, being able to find the wherewithal to hide their infant children and face their execution.
Hospital staff members continued helping others, knowing that co-workers also died or lost family that day. Despite the grief and long hours, they find strength thanks in part to those standing with Israel.
I'm not talking about military. I'm talking about support and moral support, the way we feel in the face of demonstrations going on elsewhere in the world and people supporting these horrible atrocities. And the support coming not only from the government, but from people, from groups, from organizations, has been overwhelming. Our staff has mentioned this to me several times, the feeling of not being alone.
As the hospital plans for what may lie ahead, they're expanding by adding personnel, equipment, and other locations to treat those who come through their doors.
Thank you for thinking out loud with me, Micah Halpern. Let's think out loud again next week on JBS.